Pittsburgh Steeler fans, it is time once again for another edition of the Know Your Enemy podcast. My name is Michael Beck, your deputy editor from BehindTheSteelCurtain.com, and I'm joined as, by always, one Mr. Geoffrey Benedict. Geoffrey, how you doing tonight, sir?
Doing good, Michael. Doing good.
Well, that's good to hear, but more importantly, we have a special guest as we do every Wednesday night, Mr. Michael Peterson from Bolts from the Blue. Michael, how are you doing tonight, sir?
Couldn't be better, guys.
Oh, love to hear that. We got a big clash coming down the pipeline Sunday Night Football. If everyone somehow is healthier, I guess in sickness and actual body injuries. But I'm sure we'll get to that. And just right off the top, what are things looking like for the Los Angeles Chargers in terms of injuries? Because we know that the Steelers are plagued right now.
Yeah, I was just pulling up the injury report to refresh myself on that. So it's actually a little bit bigger than what Chargers fans have kind of gotten used to this season, which I mean is a good thing for Chargers fans who are used to seeing their injury report, a laundry list of names. Usually it's between 3 and 5, which has been good. This coaching staff does like to play things a little more on the cautious side. So even if a player might be sore or something just simple like that, usually they can hold them out for a practice or two. Looking at their injury report, so this past game, they were missing starting safety Nasir Adderley. They were missing starting corner Michael Davis. They were missing one of their starting linebackers in Drew Tranquil. So quite a few defensive starters were out. Looking at the list here, I think Drew Tranquil is actually still on the COVID list. Excuse me, he wasn't injured, but I don't think he's returning from the COVID list. Nasir Adderley was limited in Wednesday's practice. You've got guys like Michael Davis also limited. He should be coming back this week. Backup safety Alohi Gilman, who does play quite a bit behind Derwin James and Nasir Adderley. He was a non-participant. He has a quad injury. Backup running back Justin Jackson, who you guys may remember from several years ago, who kind of helped spur that last second, come from behind victory on Sunday Night Football. I think it was probably 3 years ago. He's limited as well. He might come back, but then you've got guys like Linval Joseph, the veteran non-participant, and then Mark Webb, a rookie safety who might be forced into some play normally through some of these injuries, also a non-participant. So not a lot of big names, but a couple key players who are starters on the defensive side of the ball might end up coming back this week.
With the return of players on defense, do you expect what do you expect from the Chargers defense when they're healthy again? And they've kind of been all over the place.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, you could say up to this point in the season that it's been one of the best pass defenses actually in the league. I think they were top 3 for several weeks in a row. I think after allowing 298 to Kirk Cousins in their last game against the Vikings, I think they dropped to maybe 5-6, something around there. So still one of the better pass defenses in the NFL. Still, unfortunately, the worst run defense in the NFL as well. They did drop their total down a bit. And I'll tell you this, that the run defense, at least in the last few weeks, even against the Vikings, I think it was one of their best outings, despite allowing over 100 yards. They held them to 3.1 yards per run, which is phenomenal. They still ran enough to, get the job done and close out the final drive of the game. But overall, like, that side of the defense is showing signs of improvement, which is phenomenal. But you saw what the Vikings did with Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen. They were exploiting a banged up secondary. And again, that was missing a starting free safety, one of the starting outside cornerbacks. And unfortunately, the Chargers secondary is so shallow at this point. I mean, their starters for the most part are, you got the second round rookie and Asante Samuel Jr. He came back, had a pretty good game. You've got Derwin, but then you had a bunch of undrafted players kind of playing in those spots, forced to start, forced to play way too many snaps, more than they should, honestly, at this point in their careers. And you saw what happened with Justin Jefferson and what Kirk Cousins was able to do. But overall, the defense seems to be coming together. But right now, those injuries are really playing a part and kind of mitigating how fast that's coming together.
If I had to give this weekend's game some sort of a name, some sort of a title, it might be the "We Don't Like Melvin Ingram Bowl." That one might jump to mind here. I'm sure probably some better thoughts on the Chargers side of things, but just out of curiosity, what were your kind of initial thoughts, and did you expect him to try to want out of a team after signing so early on in this process?
I can't tell you that I'm surprised at how things ended or just how they went in general in Pittsburgh. His final season in LA. So for those who may not have been following Melvin Ingram for all that long prior to him coming to the Steelers, His final year, he staged what I think was called a hold in. So he wasn't holding out, like he was in camp, but he wasn't practicing, right? He was with his team, he was in meetings, stuff like that, but he was not going to practice and put his body on the line until they guaranteed money in his contract. Because in his final year under contract, he had zero guarantee. So he just, for the sake of his family and his protection, security, whatever, he wanted money. Well, the Chargers come out and I think they do right by, their former first round pick who has given them a lot of time. And they fully guaranteed him $14 million in his final year with the Chargers. Well, what Melvin Ingram did was go out there and play, I want to say 9 or 10 games, because he did struggle with some injuries, spent one stint on the IR for 3 weeks, but he ended up giving the Chargers 0 tackles for loss, 0 sacks, and arguably his worst professional season since he probably was a rookie or the second year in the NFL. So obviously the Chargers were not going to re-sign him. They weren't going to pay him the money he was probably expecting to be made, if he stuck around with the team. And so he goes off and signs with the Steelers. Well, I mean, I thought that was a good fit, honestly. The Steelers, I've always loved their defense. I think everyone respects their defense and understands that they're a ferocious, intimidating team. They've got a bunch of great players, coached well, obviously. And so you're like, okay, well, if there's really any other place that's going to get the most out of Melvin Ingram, one of those places was probably going to be the Steelers. And honestly, at the end of the day, when the news came out that he was looking for a trade or looking for a release because he was losing playing time, well, he was kind of fading with the Chargers. His final year, he was non-existent. So the way it went, I just couldn't have been surprised at all.
With Melvin Ingram gone, how is the Chargers pass rush? Obviously, you have Bosa. What do you have outside of Joey Bosa to complement him?
Yeah, so 2 guys that you'll see a lot opposite Bosa are, the starter opposite him is Uchenna Nwosu, who is, I want to say, a 4th-year player at a USC, former second-round pick, who I think fits what Brandon Staley wants to do in this 3-4 system, this 3-4 front, having him out there as an edge instead of like trying to play essentially like a stand-up base defensive end, right? I just think that fit his system. He's only 6'2", about 240, 245 pounds. It never fit him. So this past week against the Vikings arguably was his best game as a pro in his 4 years. Arguably his best game. He didn't have a sack, but he had a really nice tackle for loss. He was able to set the edge well in the run game and just overall seemed to be more active. I would say up until the Vikings game, Uchenna Nwosu, you barely heard of him. You barely heard his name. You barely saw him pop up. So a lot of people were like, this is not what we expected. As a rookie, he forced that game-winning fumble on Lamar Jackson in 2018, right? It really set the stage for who we thought was going to be a really good player. Unfortunately, he's just kind of underwhelmed. And next to him, you've got Kyler Fackrell, who's a little bit of I wouldn't say a journeyman too much. This is his 3rd team, and I want to say 6-7 years. He was with the Packers, former 3rd-round pick out of Utah State, spent last season with the Giants, had a pretty good season. He's a high motor type guy. You're going to get a lot of effort out of him. And he has flashed on several occasions, but again, hasn't really done much as far as a pure pass rusher. And I know you talked about, of course, we have Joey Bosa. But I'll tell you right now, when you compare Joey Bosa, who is normally his name is held in the same regard as players like a TJ Watt, right? Chandler Jones, just some of these elite edge rushers in the NFL. I don't know if he has a lack of help. I don't know if it's the change to more of a stand-up edge rusher instead of, his base defensive end that he's run since he's been in the NFL. He's not really producing the way that I think Chargers fans expect of Bosa. He is an all-around complete player. But if you look at his tackles for loss, you look at his sacks, which are only 5.5 on the season, and then you look at a guy like TJ Watt, right, who is the elite of the elite, 13.5, I think, tackles for loss, 12.5 sacks, something along those lines, which is just a whole other level, right? So I'll just put it this way. The Chargers pass rush needs help, and unfortunately, I just don't think the pieces are on the roster as of right now.
So Sean Manahan puts $5 in the Super Chat feature in the tip jar here. He says, thank you for your time, Michael. And he's hoping for a great game, whether it's Ben or Mason starting at quarterback for the Steelers. That's going to lead in my next question here. Historically, Ben Roethlisberger is not very good away from Heinz Field. The further he gets, this is a point Geoffrey Benedict brings up a lot. The further away you get from Pittsburgh, the worse his record is. And it's specifically bad against the Chargers as well. But for whatever reason, Steelers backups have had some success against the Chargers, be it Michael Vick going in, stealing the game, Duck Hodges obviously doing it last go-around. Are you almost wanting Ben Roethlisberger to play in this game? It feels weird to say, but he has struggled so much in the backups for whatever reason that have had success in previously San Diego, now Los Angeles.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and it's one of those like things that Chargers fans probably just get super frustrated about when you bring it up, because that seems to be a theme, and it really has been a theme over the past several seasons. That game with Duck Hodges starting, like, it's Duck Hodges. You know what I'm saying? Like, this again, like I understand the Chargers didn't have a good record last year or the year before, but they always come in right on paper. It's always like the Chargers are stacked. They can be a dark horse, whatever. But then push comes to shove, and they play a game against a former FCS starting quarterback, third string quarterback of the Steelers, comes in and somehow still beats the Chargers. And then that game where Michael Vick came in, which, I mean, you could probably argue was like a washed up Michael Vick at that point, but comes in. And I remember where I was for the ending of that game. I remember how I felt. I remember watching, I think it was Le'Veon Bell who fell over the end zone line to win the game for him. I mean, it is something else, right? And so to your point, your original question, I almost would say that I kind of want Big Ben to start. Like, it would just be right on par for the course for Mason Rudolph to come in and throw 40, 45 times and for 350 plus yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks, because of course the backup isn't going to throw picks against a defense that likes to defend the pass well. So yeah, I would probably want Big Ben in this one.
I'm like,
fair.
To add a little to that, one of my favorite stats is that since Ben Roethlisberger joined the Steelers in 2004, he has as many wins in California as Devlin Hodges and Michael Vick, who were both backups for him and played like 3 and 6 games total. It's not, we just don't win, and it's not even him. Sometimes he has good games and we just do not win.
That's kind of crazy.
Let me
just to rephrase that, or to like clarification. So Big Ben has 1 win in the state of California.
1.
Is that what that's?
He's 1 and 7.
Okay. So I just wanted, that was that drastic.
Yeah.
That everyone just has 1 win. Okay. Cool.
Yeah. And he's played 1 game in London and he lost that one. So, you get far enough away from Heinz Field and he's terrible. Well, I shouldn't even say terrible, because he's not. His numbers aren't bad. It's just the Steelers.
His record is terrible.
Yeah, with him as quarterback. If they're
I don't think he's ever won in Seattle either. 0-1, I believe.
In
Seattle.
0-1 in Seattle.
To West Coast in general, he's 1-8.
0-4 in Oakland, which doesn't that's bad. Like, if you're losing to the Raiders.
I mean, yeah, because the Raiders haven't been good until like now, right? Like, of the last 2 decades or so. Like,
they're terrible the whole time, and they just destroy us every time we go there. Getting away from that badness, on the back end, Derwin James, right? Derwin James seems to be a player that constantly is talked about as being, like, is he elite? Is he one of the top players? He seems to bring a lot of very, very different opinions out of people as to how good he is. Where do you stand on Derwin James?
I stand that he is elite. And I think if you look back, obviously, his rookie season, and yes, people are like, it was just the 1 season, right? But literally, he was first team All-Pro as a rookie, and he set the Chargers rookie tackle record. And he said at the time he tied the record for most sacks by a rookie at 3.5. That was later tied by Desmond King, but the year before was tied by Desmond King. Derwin James does it his rookie season. He was a Pro Bowler. He led I almost think single-handedly, some of his efforts helped the Chargers make it to the playoffs for the first time since 2013, helped win their game against the Ravens for their first playoff win since 2013 as well. I think he's elite. Now, the thing is, when you talk about like this season, you look at, if you want to take into his Pro Football Focus grade into consideration, it's not one of the best. I think he's kind of a middling grade at this point, 72 point something along those lines, like not the elite the way he started this season or he was as a rookie. But for those who don't know, Derwin James is playing like 5 different positions for the Chargers. And Brandon Staley's been asked about this, just in terms of like how valuable and versatile Derwin James is. It's a very popular question because we can't get enough of Brandon Staley and or talking about Derwin James in general. But Brandon Staley has actually come out and said, well, he would probably be having a much more productive season if he was playing just one position, right? One position, maybe a second one, but he's playing 5, and a 5 is the number that he does keep using. And with that in mind, like, he's just doing a lot of different things, and I think that is really, unfortunately, holding him back, as opposed to having like the interceptions, the pass breakups, to just what he did as a rookie. He's doing a lot more different things than just that. And he did a lot of stuff. But I do think he's elite. But I will say, take it all with a grain of salt. Like, maybe he would produce more if he was only playing 1 or 2 positions. But we just don't know that because he's playing 5 right now, and it's just not reality. So I still think he's very good. I will say I would like him to probably pop a little bit more than he has. More picks, more big time plays, just things along those lines to help remind people that, yeah, you're still elite and you're still here.
So this game is trending towards the Steelers being without some very key starters, especially in the defensive side of really both sides of the football. But the Steelers defense specifically here, there's a chance they'll be without T.J. Watt, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Joe Hayden, really all the big names. There's if you're looking at their injury report, even Cam Hayward was limited in practice, which he has been often this year. But still, when you look at it, all the big names are pretty rumored to not be in this lineup. Should we as Steeler fans be scared of Justin Herbert and this offense being able to throw all over this team?
So a week ago, I probably would have said yes, because the Chargers were coming off a win over the Eagles where, like, the final score was very close, but Justin Herbert just went 32 of 38 for 356 and 2 or 3 touchdowns. I think it was 2 passing, 1 rushing. So after a performance like that, which everyone said, oh, the Chargers offense is back, like, let's rock, again, going into a defense with, like, the Steelers that's missing all these key names. Yeah, I probably would have said so, but they just got done playing the Vikings, who were missing 5 starters, including Harrison Smith, Danielle Hunter, Anthony Barr, Michael Peterson. I mean, all their big names for the most part were gone. And yet the defense, and Mike Zimmer is a great defensive coach, don't get me wrong, but the team was still 3-5 coming into this game, right? Had lost quite a few games. And so for the Chargers to come in, and unfortunately, after looking good against the Eagles, looked pretty bad against the Vikings. In fact, it was probably one of their worst games of the year and looked just like their losses or the performances against the Patriots in that loss, against the Ravens in that loss, where everything just feels disconjointed. There's just things aren't clicking for whatever reason. Our players, our best players like Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler, guys are dropping passes. And I think the Chargers are one of the top teams, leaders in drop passes by their pass catchers. So Justin Herbert, I think, is fine. His stats don't look as good as probably the last few weeks as you'd expect, but he's not getting a lot of help. And he is, but like in key moments where, like, Mike Williams' drop against the Vikings was he was going to walk in for a touchdown. It was on this pick slant near the goal line, and that was a for sure touchdown. Austin Eckler runs an angle Texas route, and it goes right through his hands. But if he caught it, he had about 15 yards of green grass in front of him because Eric Kendricks was, couldn't keep up with him. So again, long story short, I would normally say I would expect the Steelers defense to have a long day, but recency bias tells us that, like, the Chargers could just come out and struggle against this defense no matter who's on the field.
Yeah, the Chargers started out 4-1. They've gone 1-3 in the last 4 games, which started with the Baltimore Ravens. And being someone who sees the Steelers play the Ravens every year, we have seen that team come up with different ideas on how to defend, your offense that other people then copy. We saw that big time last season, where even the Washington football team said the Ravens put things on film that we copied and they worked. Do you think there's a chance that's what has happened here, that some other teams are picking up and being able to have success with something the Ravens showed? Or is this, is this injuries? Is this just a tougher part of the schedule? Is something off with the team coming out of the bye week? Or do you think there is actually some kind of, maybe teams are starting to have a ways to attack Justin Herbert and the Chargers offense?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because it's quite striking, right, between the 4-1 start and then the 1-3 skid that they're on now. A lot of people point out, well, the Ravens, the Patriots, and the Vikings are all coached by phenomenal coaches, defensive coaches, who do a really good job. But again, before the Patriots game, we knew the Ravens were going to be a tough game no matter how that went. But, like, after their opening 5-6 game gauntlet against teams like the Chiefs, the Browns, the Ravens, the schedule looked like it was going to soften up. I think before the Ravens game, Mike Clay did his strength of schedule thing, and the Chargers were 4th easiest. And so we're like, oh, cool. We got through the hard part, 4-2. Time to kind of just coast and take care of business and get into the playoffs. Well, all of a sudden, this stretch of the schedule, whatever you want to call it, all of a sudden looks a lot harder, right? The Patriots ended up being pretty good and still look pretty good. The Bengals are coming up. The Broncos, who looked like they were going to tumble after a decent start, are all of a sudden still, above 500. I think there's only 2 teams the rest of the way that are under 500. Everyone else is 500 right now or above. So all of a sudden, yes, the schedule, I think, is a lot stronger than initially we all thought. But again, the Ravens, I think, put a pretty decent structure on film, a strategy where they showed that if you can get after Justin Herbert fairly early, he is not able to bounce back, I think, similarly the way he did as a rookie. And the offensive line is missing their starting right guard and right tackle. So immediately, John Harbaugh and the Ravens were like, we're going to attack this side. And Storm Norton, the right tackle, had a terrible day. Right guard, Michael Schofield, still a terrible day. The next week, Patriots come in. And Bill Belichick, we've seen this story before. Last year, they beat the Chargers 45-0 in SoFi Stadium. We kind of seen that story, right? Same thing. He goes, this is our matchup we need to exploit. And so he starts running twists and games. And he's one of the best at scheming up games up front. So, again, not a surprise. They were able to get after Herbert, drops, miscommunications. Unfortunately, led to the demise of the Chargers in that game. And again, it sounds like a broken record. The same thing happened against the Vikings, right? We unfortunately, here's one aspect that I think it plays a bigger role than a lot of people don't realize is the Chargers don't have a real strong running back behind Austin Eckler. And I mean, as a runner, as a pass protector, just as an offensive player, their running back 2 situation is so muddy that you got 2 young players that you could go back and watch the Vikings and point at several situations where that running back blew his protection and it ended up costing Justin Herbert being sacked, ended up costing him throwing an incompletion on a money down, even though he had a guy wide open, just things like that. So there's a lot of little things that are adding up besides the fact that they are missing some players. There's just a lack of players stepping up to the plate and making plays. And until that turns itself around, the Chargers, I just don't think should be held in as high of a light as they have been, at least compared to the way they started 4-1 this season.
So you brought up the O-line. I'm curious your thoughts on our old buddy Matt Filer and how he's stepped into the Chargers rotation, how he's performed, because I know he's went back to his guard spot.
Yeah, I think he's absolutely phenomenal. I think he was one of the best signings, not only for the Chargers, but in all of the NFL this past offseason. He has been rock solid, and I think an awesome player to have next to Rashawn Slater, our rookie left tackle, who's also playing lights out. That side of the line, of course, Corey Linsley at center, who was last year's first team All-Pro center, that's phenomenal, and they threw in Ode Abushi, who's kind of like a budget guard, and free agency signed him, but who was playing not super lights out, but the guy wasn't screwing up. He was getting his job done. He was just solid, man. And that's all you can ask of a Chargers offensive lineman after a decade of everyone being barely serviceable. Just to have guys who come in, don't screw up, and just kind of do enough is perfectly fine. But Brian Bulaga, who was a guy we signed prior to last season, we haven't seen him since halfway through week 1 against Washington, right? So, I mean, they're just missing some players. But Matt Filer, man, him being healthy, him getting the job done, you should see some of the film that comes out with Rashawn Slater and Filer blocking together and comboing in the run game, man. It is something special. So absolutely love Filer. I thought he was huge in terms of a player who's just solid, but also a player that helped make our offensive line a bit bigger, because I feel like our offensive line in recent years has just been kind of small and didn't really have the pure mass and strength to be good in the run game. And I think Filer helps kind of progress the Chargers offensive line in that category.
You brought up Rashawn Slater as a rookie starter. You have Asante Samuel starting, but even the rest of the rookies, I think every single one player they drafted has played at least in a couple of games. And they seem the last few weeks have been getting more involved in the team. Is that attrition? Is that injuries? Or is this rookie class looking like one that can be, a really solid one to build a team around?
Yeah, I think, of course, the picks of Slater and Asante Samuel Jr. were absolute home runs. like the perfect player at the perfect position that the Chargers needed to hit on in those first 2 rounds. Now, after that, I think you could have gave the Chargers like an A grade for the entire draft just based on their first 2 picks. Well, all of a sudden the 3rd round comes, and we were thinking like off-ball linebacker, defensive tackle, maybe even double dipping in offensive line early just because of the problems that they've had with that position for so long. And all of a sudden they grab a receiver in Josh Palmer. Now, unless you were a pretty big draft head,
Or Canadian.
Yeah, you probably wouldn't have thought much of Josh Palmer, who didn't have, like, at least on paper, the best like career in general at Tennessee. Well, I mean, he was their leading receiver with 450 yards and a handful of touchdowns, but he had 3 different quarterbacks throwing to him. So if you look at the film, the guy did his best work against Alabama and Georgia. So right away, and then seeing him in training camp, the guy's the real deal, and I think he's going to be a really good player in this league, at least in terms of a wide receiver 2, a real solid wide receiver 3. I think once he gets really acclimated to the NFL, but then they went and drafted Trey McKitty, who was a seldomly used pass catcher for Georgia and Florida State during his college career. Tom Telesco called him the most pro-ready blocking tight end that was left on the board. And that is something they've needed, don't get me wrong, but a 3rd round pick on a guy who is probably never really going to contribute in the passing game, who's tight end 4 or 5 right now, didn't seem like the place to take him in the 3rd round, especially when you have extra picks on day 2. And then you keep going. Chris Rumpf in the 4th round, fine. He's put on good mass. And I think he's actually going to be a pretty good slippery edge rusher if he continues to build size and work on his game. I like him. Brendan Hymus, an offensive tackle, will turn guard now, but he was a left tackle for Nebraska, set their starting record for an offensive lineman at the university. So versatility there, like the pick. 6th round, we got Larry Roundtree, running back from Missouri, all-time leading rusher from their school, and then Nick Niemann from the University of Iowa, which I'm pumped about because I'm a University of Iowa alum. He was an uber athletic linebacker, even more athletic than Kenneth Murray, believe it or not. So I think he's going to be a core special teamer. And then in the 7th round, we got Mark Webb, which this was probably one of the things. I know 7th rounds are just dart throws, right? But there were some players I thought who were on the board at other positions of need that we could have used instead of a safety that tested really slowly, not that great, and was probably going to play more of like a dime linebacker role instead of being like a free-ranging free safety, which we have 0 depth at behind us here at least. So again, kind of rambling about this whole group, but first 2 guys, awesome. The rest of the way, there's some pros and cons, but I don't think it's as great to say like they nailed the whole draft. I think they nailed it at the top, and we'll just have to wait and see on the rest of the guys.
When we get to the offseason, we might have to bring you back on to break down Iowa and Tyler Linderbaum. I'm sure we could chat about that guy for a while. But one of the final questions I want to ask you here, Brandon Staley, when he was first hired, I'm not sure that he was the most favorably liked candidate, especially across the NFL. But I'm just curious what the thoughts are on the head coach now.
Yeah, I'll be one of the first people to tell you that he wasn't even in my top 3, nor did I even really think about him all that much. I think the majority of people believe that to capitalize on Justin Herbert's really good, historic, offensive rookie of the year type season he had in year 1, that they needed to go get an offensive coach, which was Brian Dable, Arthur Smith. I think those are my top 2 guys. Eric Bieniemy, I would have taken as well. Don't get me wrong. Either way, just like someone who's shown that they can take an offense and like just take it to the next level, utilize him and all his gifts that he has. But then they go ahead and hire Brandon Staley. And my first thought, like I was out of the house when it happened, and I was like, oh, I got to get home and start, getting on this. But like Brandon Staley, like the 1-year wonder at DC for the Rams, which I mean, it was the league's #1 defense. So like the guy's got to be good. You look at his history. Like 5 years ago, he was coaching at a Division III school. Like that's insane. Normally people don't want to take risks on that, and I just didn't think the Chargers were in a place to take a risk like that. But again, I'm an idiot in hindsight. Like he's been absolutely phenomenal. Like I'll be totally honest. He is. I couldn't imagine it being any other coach. After Anthony Lynn, Mike McCoy, North Turner, all these real classic coaches, guys, he is the biggest breath of fresh air in terms of his mindset, the culture he's instilled with the team. how open he is with the media in terms of like not treating us like we're a bunch of idiots who just happen to be asking questions about football. Like as a guy who played college football as well, I personally like when you actually give us information that like is interesting and not just coach speak, cliches and stuff like that. You ask him a question, and if it at all basically demands a response of like getting into the X's and O's, he's pretty good at like talking about it and laying it all out there in a way that like everyone can understand it. Because a lot of those beat writers, again, aren't people who probably played football or anything at a high level, didn't, working it a lot. We're just kind of journalists who fell into sports media. And it's just refreshing. That's the biggest thing I can say. He's just all about relationships. Like every player on the team would die for Brandon Staley. Right now, would step in front of a bullet for him. I just think he's such a phenomenal person who genuinely, truly cares about the people around him. I mean, to the point where he makes sure if you're asking questions in the press conferences, he makes a point to say your first name always. Like it's just whoever he's talking to, he makes a point to say it because at least it just grabs you a little bit in, right? It's almost like a weird verbal hug that he does. So I could go on and on about Brandon Staley, but he is just so refreshing and exactly what I think the Chargers needed after so many coaching staffs where they were kind of just beating a dead horse.
Well, that's great stuff to hear. Now, before we let you go, we usually have a couple closing questions for you. Firstly, to put you completely on the spot, do you have a game prediction and a final score that you could give to us?
Final score and a game prediction. I think it's pretty normal for me to like pick the Chargers to win this game. I'm probably going to do that again, but I will say like I don't feel great about it, especially after what happened with the Vikings game. Let's just call it. I think the Steelers defense is going to be pretty good with or without TJ Watt. They might get Minka back. Overall, I think they do play the Chargers well because the Chargers haven't been good at home. If you guys haven't noticed, they're like 1-4 or something along those lines. 2-3 actually, I think it is at home. I'll say the Chargers win. I don't think the offense gets back on track against this defense. I think Tomlin is way too good of a coach to let them run freely on offense. So let's say Chargers win 20 to, let's just do 20-17. It's always going to come down to a field goal within 3 points. It's what the Chargers do. I think they just barely hang on, fight like hell, end the game with the ball in their hands, but it's not a stress-free game by any means.
Yeah, as Steeler fans, we are definitely used to that. Now, Michael, last thing for you, is there anything you want to plug before we let you get out of here?
Yeah, so as they mentioned at the start of this stream, I'm the lead editor over at BulletinBlue.com, which is SB Nation's Chargers community. If you guys want to read anything just for from the other side of the line about this matchup, you can over there at boltsfromtheblue.com. And then I think you guys can see my Twitter handle down below here. It's at Zone Tracks. It's if anyone who doesn't understand that, it's a coaching point when coaching the zone offense. I'm a big lover of offensive line play, so in case you're curious as why my name is something as weird as that, that's what it is. It's when you run the zone offense, you stay on your tracks. People call them zone tracks. So there it is. But that's all I got.
Excellent. Great stuff, Michael. Thanks for joining us tonight, and appreciate all your time.
Yeah, guys. Appreciate it.
All right. Have a good night, man. And everyone that's currently watching here on YouTube and Facebook, just hang tight. We're going to jump over to the second half of our show and break down things from the Steelers' perspective. Now, we will jump in that break in just a moment, but if you're listening onto your podcast platform, you're going to want to go ahead and click over to part 2 right now. Alrighty, Pittsburgh Steelers fans, it's time for the second half of our show today. Of course, you're listening to Know Your Enemy. My name is Michael Beck. He is Geoffrey Benedict. We're hanging out, breaking down the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Los Angeles Chargers, not San Diego, Los Angeles. I didn't mess it up so far, but there's still time to do so. Geoffrey, how are you feeling about this game?
Not great. I have a feeling Ben Roethlisberger is going to play, and that's just, and he's going to go 1-8 in the state of California.
I have a prediction on this. Since you brought it up, I think we're due for one last Big Ben West Coast stinker, like something terrible, like 7 for 24. You're just like, oh my God, what are we watching? It's just like hard to get through. If Ben plays, I don't know why. Since the schedules come out, I've just had a feeling this is just going to be like one of those ugly games. I don't know if it's going to be a blowout, but I just have a sickening feeling that it's going to be bad. And speaking of things going bad, I guess we should probably bring up last week's just terrible game against the Detroit Lions. Well, what are your just quick thoughts on that?
Quick thoughts. Oh, okay.
I know. We're about the preview show. We're not about the the addressing of what happened, but probably should bring it up.
Okay. First, I want to say with the players the defense lost, holding Detroit to 16 points in 14 drives. Detroit had 14 drives in the game. They scored 16 points. I'm actually really proud of the Steelers' defense. There was that time period where basically they got caught with against an offensive package that Detroit wasn't showing beforehand, and really attacked them exactly where they're weakest, which is their defensive line depth. When you're putting 3 defensive linemen out there every play, and one of them is a starter, that's not good. They were getting guys to the second level. They were getting guys on everyone. I mean, there was a play where Minkah Fitzpatrick was the only person not blocked on a run play. They won every single matchup, and Minkah Fitzpatrick had to make the play, and he did. He made the play on that actual run. I think it was like a 6-yard run. But outside of that package, the Steelers' defense absolutely dominated the Detroit Lions. Cameron Hayward played more snaps than he'd played since he was 26 in the 2015 season, right? He hasn't played that many snaps in a game since he was 26 years old. That's crazy. It was Keith Butler's first year coaching the defense, right? That's a long time ago. So I'm actually very proud of the Steelers' defense on this. On the offense, wow.
How do you fumble twice in overtime?
Well, I will say one of the things that happened is after Kevin Dotson left the game, the Steelers really got away from the run game, partly because once Kevin Dotson left the game, the run game wasn't nearly as good. And so what really worries me taking over from that Detroit game to the Chargers is the Chargers are a terrible run defense, right? We should be able to run all over them. Well, if we don't have Trey Turner and Kevin Dotson, right? You've got Dan Moore Jr., who is not good pass blocking, pass protecting, not good, really good run blocker. But if you move to the right from him, it's J.C. Hassenauer, Kendrick Green, Joe Haig, Chukwuma Okorafor. That's not a line that can run block. You're not looking at that line going, yeah, let's go get them, guys. Let's smash mouth football. That's not that line, right? That's not going to cut it. So to me, if those guards are out, this is going to be a rough game, because it doesn't matter how bad the Chargers are at run defense. We're going to be worse on offense because we don't have the blockers.
Oh, gosh, you just get a little sick pit in your stomach just thinking about it. But to move on from that game, but kind of ties in with it. When you're speaking about the defense, there's one name that constantly got brought up, and it's already getting brought up a ton in our live chat here. This is Devin Bush. A lot of people want to see him on the bench now. I am definitely leaning towards him having regressed. He has not looked anything like himself since tearing his ACL. He was an absolute stud his sophomore season until he tore his ACL, one of the best linebackers in football. Now he looks timid. He looks like he's running away from contact. He doesn't look like someone that's a linebacker in the NFL. What's going on with him?
He has lost a step right now. I keep saying this, like right now he's slowed by injury. We don't know if he's ever going to get that back, right? We don't actually know at this point if he's going to get that back. That's one part. Devin Bush used to be able to use his agility and his quickness to get around linemen. He didn't so much get off of them. He would engage with them, but then boom, slip that and get past them because he was just wicked athletic. He's lost that. That takes time to adjust to. The fact that like you normally would have done this one thing, but you just can't do it now. It's just not going to work. I think we see him trying to do that. There was a play where he tried to like run around an offensive lineman blocking into the C gap, just trying to run around him and get back. And he couldn't. Like, yeah, you used to do that, but you can't do that right now. The other point I want to make on the linebackers is something that's very much a problem with the team we're facing this week with the Chargers. And that is when you build a team around a defensive line and then you have linebackers that are small and fast and can cover, right? The goal is that defensive line keeps those linebackers clean. That's the goal. That's the idea behind that. That's not happening. Against Detroit, they were regularly getting guards on Joe Schobert and Devin Bush. They're not winning that. They're not going to win against a guard. Like they're not like I've said before. How many players are like Vince Williams are there left in the NFL? And we talked about that in the offseason. There's not many like that left in the NFL. They're just not built that way. And if you can't keep guards from getting to your linebackers, all of a sudden, the guy that needs to make the play on the tackle is Minkah Fitzpatrick. And one of the things you see the same thing between the Steelers and the Chargers is both teams have a free safety leading their team in tackles, especially in run tackles. And when your major guy tackling the running back is your free safety, that's bad. That's very, very bad. And it's not your safety's fault. In our case, I don't even put it completely on the linebackers. Yeah, the linebackers aren't as good as what we'd like them to be. I put it mostly on the defensive line.
Yeah, it's been huge with those injuries, of course, to Tyson Alualu and Stephon Tuitt, who, by the closer we get here, once we hit around week 13, you kind of just assume he's going to be done for the year. It's been really tough. The Steelers, of course, their backups are a little undersized, can get pushed around a little bit outside of Cam Hayward, of course. But in hindsight, I know the Steelers had the opportunity to make a move for Fletcher Cox. Would you have, hindsight now, having seen this defensive front get pushed around so much and had the ball run against them, hindsight, would you have been more pressed to make a move at the deadline to try to upgrade that defensive front to try to clean up these linebackers?
Yes, absolutely. But I want to go farther than that, Michael. Do you remember who my draft crush was? The one player I wanted more than anything else.
Oh, it was a D lineman. Oh, my goodness gracious.
Christian Barmore from Alabama.
Right.
You know what he was doing in the New England Patriots game? That dude is eating double teams for breakfast.
Yeah.
He's over there absolutely dominating. If you have him one-on-one, he's wrecking your entire play. Teams are double teaming that guy regularly, and he still holds the point of attack. And I'm sitting there. I was watching some New England Patriots football, and I was just like, I was crying inside. I understand, and I said it at the time, I understand Najee Harris, running back, that's a big need. That's very important, and Najee Harris is the best player on our offense. But I've never been a big fan of offense. I'm a defense-first guy, and it just killed me watching film of Christian Barmore absolutely just wrecking on the defensive line and then watching what we have, right? And I've been a big supporter of guys like Henry Mondeau, right? I like the guy. He's a good depth piece. He is a situational, rotational player who, in the right circumstances, gives you value, right? In a rotation. If you're up and you're playing a lot of dime, yeah, put him in there because he's a decent pass rusher. He was in there against Detroit because we only have, 5 defensive linemen? And we were playing 3 every snap. You've got to rotate those guys out. And he had to go in, and they were just bullying him. Oh, my goodness. It was ugly.
Well, it really sucks, too, is Carlos Davis. He's also on the injured list. He's probably be one of the top backups, too, had he have been healthy. So the Steelers really just a bullet to their foot. It's really tough for them. Tough sledding for his defensive line. It looked like you have a thought there.
Well, I was going to say we added his brother, but Khalil Davis is not a very stout run defender. It was like we added another pass rusher. And I'm like, Isaiah Loudermilk, and then we have Isaiah Loudermilk, who's our second best run defending defensive lineman. He played 11 snaps.
He looked pretty good too. To throw that out there, I feel like Loudermilk should be getting more of these snaps.
Other than when he faced your guy, Taylor Decker, who you wanted the Steelers to try and acquire, and that's not going to happen because he just absolutely
he's one of the
dominated
best
in that game. The one outside run where he's just straight up blocking Alex Highsmith and containing him, just like you're not going anywhere. Alex Highsmith is one of the better run defending edges in the league. Like that, you don't see that often. You don't run to his side outside and just run and just be clear like that. Taylor Decker handled Cam Hayward a couple of times. Just 1-versus-1, won that matchup. Not even like, kind of did enough that they could get around. No, like straight up moved Cameron Hayward. The guy in his first game back was dominant. Oh, that was crazy. I'm going to predict, watching the film on that Detroit's not going to go 0-17 or 0-16-1. They're winning a game because their offensive line with Decker coming back is a world different than it was before.
Oh, their center too is out for the year. I'm blanking on his name, but they have one of the best centers in football as well. The Lions,
they had completely built around this offensive line, and then they just weren't healthy.
For their lack of talent, they have one of, if not the best offensive line in football when they're 100% healthy. But that is neither here nor there. But for this Sunday's game, unfortunately, for this Sunday's game, looking at the Steelers injury report, I know we kind of broke down the Chargers side of things in the first half. Boy, oh boy, does it look grim. If everyone's out, so say Ben's not playing, Dotson's not playing, say Turner's not playing, so say Joe Hayden, say TJ Watt, say Minka Fitzpatrick. Is there a hope in heck, or are the Steelers losing by 40 this week, or what's going on here?
I don't have much hope. Like, I from the start of the season, I penciled this in as a loss. Like our offseason shows, I was just like, yeah, we're losing to the Chargers. It's in LA. Like we're going to lose that. But I anything can happen. Devlin Hodges won. Like Devlin Hodges came in LA and won. I don't know. Maybe Dwayne Haskins comes in and is like, they said I threw lazy passes and just, maybe he's in there in the huddle on his phone and then throwing touchdowns. Who knows? You don't know what could happen. But to me, yeah, it looks pretty bad. And here's a question I want to ask you, because you've played football and you coach it
once or twice. Yeah.
There have been people who've been saying, you know what? Everyone who's banged up, sit them. Go in there and basically like tank the game.
Have a bye week,
right?
Another bye. Have
a bye week for these guys. Let them get healthy. Don't risk them. What does that kind of an idea, like, what would that do to a team? Is that a viable option, or is that going to like have cost to it in momentum and team, I don't know, whatever, philosophy, attitude? What do you think?
Psyche would be way down. The two thoughts behind this here would be, number one, on like the positive side, is that everyone's going to get healthy. I think people would appreciate that to a degree, but once you start talking about, oh, you know what, this game doesn't matter, then you're going to start losing the locker room. Once you start saying like, it's just one game. There's only 17 of them, and each game means so much in professional football. It's just not an option. If guys are healthy enough to play, they're going to play. And that's one of the things too. If you're 10 weeks into a football season, like we are, 100%, there is not one guy in that locker room that is 100% healthy. There's not one. So like everyone's dealing with something, some sort of low-grade ankle sprain or wrist sprain or pulled muscle. People are battling through something. Every single player in the league. That's just what it comes down to in football, especially at that level. Everyone's hurt. So it really isn't an option to be like, oh, you know what? We're banged up, so we'll just give the star players a week off. It just doesn't work like that, unfortunately. And you can't just throw a game away. That's one of those things that you'll lose your locker room just like that. And I don't care who the head coach is. All of a sudden, you make one decision like that, and then everyone's looking at you different in meetings. And everyone's like, oh, are we sure this is the guy? And then those whispers start coming up, and only bad things come from that. So I really don't think that is an option. Perhaps they could go into the game saying, okay, these guys are banged up, so we will play you a little bit less. You may play 50% of the snaps just because you're so injured, but like you're close enough to playing. You could see something like that, but with how banged up this team is right now and the environment they're going into and that brutal loss, I have very low expectations this game. To me, if I wasn't covering it for BTSC and doing the tweets and the post-game press conference breakdown and all the things that we love to do for the site, I have the feeling this is the game that kind of turns into the one where it's the fourth quarter and you're like, oh, what else do I have to do on a Sunday night? That's kind of what I'm. The impression I'm getting right now. But it is any given Sunday. Is that the kind of vibe you're getting to, Geoffrey?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And these are the games. These are the. I don't know. This is the Steelers. Like, you have that game against the Lions where you're like, no matter what happens, there's no reason you should lose to the Lions, right? And then we managed to tie them, which is more frustrating. I think the tie is the most frustrating result, because in football, not only have your team failed to win and haven't even been delivered the loss that they played bad enough to receive, but then you get an extra 7 minutes of just football that goes nowhere, right? And that was some really, really frustrating football in overtime. So I think, and then for the non-result at the end of overtime, you're just like, really? Like really? What? Like, I feel like I've wasted my entire day. Like, you just stole like 4 hours of my life, and I'm not happy about it. I think that's kind of like, ties almost feel worse than a loss in the NFL.
I definitely can get on board with that. That was a brutal one to get through, and one of the hardest games I think I've ever watched start to finish, and that includes that 3-point game against the Dolphins on that rainy Monday night. That was still a fun game. It was like, it was a hard game, but it was fun. Like the monsoon, this disgusting field that they're trying to trudge through, it was still enjoyable all those years ago now. But that was just tough. Fumbling twice in overtime and not even getting an opportunity to get Boswell on the field when he's proven he can kick those long field goals. It was just, that was a game that you feel like the Steelers probably win 9 times out of 10, even in those situations. But the 2 fumbles, that was just a brutal way to go out.
And my point is, like, the Steelers will do that, and then you'll have a game you're sitting there and saying, you know what, the Steelers, this is a loss. The Steelers are going to lose this game, and they come out and win it. And they often win it in like an improbable way, in a weird way. Somebody stepping up, or some, crazy plays going on, something weird. So I'm not writing the Steelers out. In fact, I'm probably going to pick them to win this. But I don't know. It's one of those games where what is this game going to be like? It could go literally any direction. I don't know.
Yeah, it's really trying. Like, all the factors are against them. I like when you look at it. They're traveling across the country. It's a night game, which I know the Steelers play good in prime time, but it's prime time on the West Coast. And it just keeps going down from there. They stink on that coast. All the injuries. Who knows who's going to be a quarterback? Apparently, Ben's not even going to all the meetings. That was kind of the thing that popped up today. So, like, a lot of factors are against this team. Does that make them more likely to win because they're just the Steelers and that's what they do? Or is this something where you're like, like every factor feels against this team right now?
Yeah, I just can't. I can't. Tomlin coaches his best when he's in a bad spot. And this is a bad spot. So, I don't know. This could be one of those games where Tomlin just pulls something out and wins it. One thing I do want to talk though about is Mason Rudolph. I wanted to bring up Mason Rudolph because this is huge in this game, especially if he is the quarterback. I feel like Mason Rudolph is worse in Matt Canada's offense than he was in Randy Fichtner's offense, which is weird because Randy Fichtner's offense was pretty much just bad. And in Matt Canada, like, the whole idea is run more of the college stuff. Like, run more stuff like he saw and ran when he was in college. This is stuff Mason Rudolph theoretically was comfortable running before. And man, does he just look bad at it. Like, really, the RPOs were a huge problem for Ben last season. Then, like, Ben got better at it this year, and it's actually been pretty good. And then Mason Rudolph comes in and just is bad at RPOs. Like, I don't get it. I really don't get it. I really expected and was looking forward to seeing Mason Rudolph both last year and this year running more Matt Canada stuff. Like, you remember before the last game of the season last year when we found out Mason Rudolph was going to start that game, I was excited for it because I was like, I want to see Matt Canada put more Matt Canada stuff in the offense. And then there was actually less of it. It was more of a Randy Fichtner offense. And this year, yeah, he played and we did less We did less of that stuff, and the offense was more vanilla and more predictable. So for me, like, I don't know. I just off the whole, it's my whole deal of Ben Roethlisberger being terrible in California, and we always lose when Ben Roethlisberger plays in California. But man, I don't know if I want Mason Rudolph simply because, he doesn't fit this offense. It's pretty bad.
So today, I don't know if you saw, but on BehindTheSteelCurtain.com, I had a pretty forward-looking article on where the positions kind of rank for the Steelers' kind of top off-season priorities. Of course, quarterbacks at the top of the list. I don't think that was going to be all that surprising to anyone. But as we sit here right now, after that game Rudolph played and these rumors that Haskins is distracted and Ben's looking old, is it fair to say that the 2022 starting quarterback is not on this roster right now?
I have disagreed with that consistently, but I'm leaning more towards that. I honestly think we could see a Jacoby Brissett. We could see somebody like that, bring him in to be like that Mike Tomczak, be that kind of bridge to the next guy. I really don't think we're going to get a big name. I really don't. I don't care if Aaron Rodgers leaves Green Bay. I don't think he's coming to Pittsburgh. Like, I think that's where we'd be wrong. I expect a veteran transition.
To cut you off there, though, we are in this new era when players aren't happy. When there's a lot of losing, they want out. So you have to, when you have star players, and the Steelers have those, and TJ Watt and Minka Fitzpatrick, you need a win, or the rest of your star players are going to start asking to get the heck out of town. With more pressure like that, having a Jacoby Brissett basically means we're just punting on a season. You're not winning a Super Bowl with Jacoby Brissett. What happens then? Do the Steelers need to sign Brissett or Jimmy Garoppolo and make their first-round pick a quarterback and hope they can just take it over? We're just not in that era anymore where you can just throw a C-plus quarterback at the mix and just be like, yeah, we're fine going 6-11 this year. It just, with the modern athlete, that just doesn't seem like a viable option to me.
I honestly think we could do better than that with Jacoby Brissett. I honestly think we could. He got drafted based on his play in Matt Canada's offense. The guy, it's a good fit. And it would be an investment in, let's get Matt Canada running what Matt Canada wants to run. Let's get that established. And then we bring in a kid, a young guy, and ease him into the system. Let him learn it from someone who can run it legit, who can really, really run it. That would be my side. And I think if the offensive line comes together at all, the young guys, if Dan Moore Jr. improves, if Kendrick Green gets an offseason where he builds up the strength levels to where, gets a little size and strength on him to fill out his center role, I think this could work. I think that could work. I may be delusional, but I think we could see Matt Canada's offense do better with that kind of situation.
We'd still have the worst quarterback in the North, though. That's the thing to me. I like.
It's going to be. Even if you take Ben Roethlisberger as a rookie, he wouldn't be better than these guys next year, right? He wasn't he was winning games with a defense and a run game, but it took him several years to grow into that. We're gonna be the worst quarterback in this division for a little while. That's just where we're gonna be.
Yeah, it just seems like things are timing up for not to be so good for us and good for the other teams, but hopefully they can figure something out. As we do approach the end of the show, though, to get back into this weekend's game, Geoffrey, who is going to win Sunday Night Football between the Pittsburgh Steelers and Los Angeles Chargers, and what is that final score going to be?
Before I do that, I want to really quick give myself a shout out. I predicted on this show last week Detroit beating the Steelers 20-17, and as they lined up to kick the field goal in overtime that they would shank horribly, I was sitting there looking at the screen, and it was the sinking feeling in my chest that I was like, they're going to win this 19-16 when I predicted 20-17. It's going to be 19-16. And when we actually did the staff prediction article, right, I wrote in there 19-16 because that's what I thought I'd put. I said it on our show, and I wrote it in there. And then when Mason, I actually wrote in there, I had originally picked the the Detroit Lions to win this game, but now I changed it. It's going to be a crazy score. It's going to be a weird one. I'm going to go Pittsburgh Steelers beat the Chargers 15-13.
Okay, I am going with the Los Angeles Chargers smacking the very beat-up Pittsburgh Steelers in a tough one. I think this one's going to be 34-10, and it's going to be hard to watch from start to finish, and it's going to be one of the worst games in some time. That's honestly just what I feel like is coming down the pipeline here. I don't even think it's that hard of a take.
If we're down both those guards, the offense is going to be in real trouble.
Well, the offense was in real trouble against not a very good defense last week, and then they couldn't put up points then. And they're traveling across the country, and they have less bodies for an entire game now. So I feel sick to my stomach in this one. But, Geoffrey, before we sign out, what do you want to plug for the people?
I had a Vertex come out today that I'm very proud of. It was all about how the Steelers faced and the reasons they struggled against the Detroit Lions run game and how they ended up solving that and how they fixed the problem. It's quite interesting. It's all about, if you're interested in how in-game adjustments occur, right? It's mostly about that, looking at the formation changes, how they were moving people around. It was a good one. I was very pleased with it. I thought there was good stuff in there. So check that out. That's my main one.
Hey, and as always, make sure you're clicking over to BehindTheSteelCurtain.com. It should be your one-stop shop for all things Pittsburgh Steelers. Most importantly, we know there's tons and tons of injury news that you'll get first at BTSC. So make sure you're clicking over to the website because you're going to want to know who's in and who's out of that COVID list and who's actually practicing, because there's a ton of it coming down the pipeline each and every day. So make sure you're checking the website if it's just for that. Because that will give you everything you need to know for Sunday's matchup. But aside from that, make sure you're listening to the entire podcast platform, because if you're watching on YouTube and Facebook, you're only getting about the third of the story. There is so much great content for you if you listen to your podcast on Apple Podcasts or Pandora, Spotify, what have you. You will be able to get your podcast from BTSC and all our great other titles there. So for my co-host, Geoffrey Benedict, my name is Michael Beck. You've been listening to Know Your Enemy, and we'll catch you guys next week.